As Ted said, I run a company called Supernormal, and we're a design, strategy, and research collaborative that was created to improve the translation of new types of data and computational processes into hopefully intelligent design, development, and planning outcomes. And we're kind of a motley crew of architects and designers, planners, and computer programmers. Some of us met in practice as designers and planners, some of us at the Media Lab at MIT in the social computing group, where we are a spin out of the social computing group, which is a name created to build software to shape cities. The thing that merges us, in spite of all of our differences, is a shared value system, which I imagine many of you also share, and I'll kind of get into that. But we try to look at the design process more holistically and to merge this kind of qualitative stuff about place with quantitative thinking. So I'm going to break this into two parts. The first part is kind of setting the stage, what's our context, and why do we even exist in the first place? And the second is, what does it mean to be practicing and doing the things that we're doing in the world right now? So the stage is this. I think we're all probably aware of this. There's actually quite a bit of information out in the world right now. Every day we create something like 2.5 quintillion bytes of data. I don't even know what that means, but it's a lot of information. And this comes from everything, right? It comes from this thing. All those pictures we are producing. It comes from those cars that Jeff Speck was talking about yesterday. It comes from all the smart city stuff. GPS, everything, purchase transaction records. There's a lot of information. And there's been a huge amount of work that's been really excellent, actually, at the scale of regional planning and I would say journalism. And we're actually killing it, the scale of building systems, right? The nest is awesome. But then there's this scale that we all work at in between, which is a little harder. That's the building block and neighborhood. And right now that often feels to us a little bit more like a dark art. I'm sure you've all been to public meetings and had that experience of trying to pitch a narrative without any information to back it up, but we're experts and we are good at it, and there's a reason we're there, but it's, we don't have something to grasp onto like we do in the planning scale. And the reality is, of course, the scale of the neighborhood and the block are the scale of human interaction. That's where we live our lives, fall in love, it's where we create, and it's where we play. And so what we're trying to do at Supernormal is try to figure out how we can bridge the gap, how we can leverage our technological capacity, hopefully with good self-awareness and a little bit of humbleness, to improve development and design practices. So pardon the academic nature of this diagram, but it's an important one. I always show it to my students. In 2017, we were in a funny place. We need new processes and tools, actually, to get us over the hump from input to output. Input is data, it's information, it's sometimes the programming that our clients give us, all of that cultural baggage that we have when we approach a project or a given process. The output, of course, what we want to see on the other side is really great, impactful development that's going to make people's lives better. But in order to do that, we need to select meaningful inputs, right? We can't take all information, it has to be the meaningful stuff. And we have to process it in a way that makes sense. So all processing systems and software are not created equally, they have implied values, and we should be aware of that. We traffic in the smart city space a little bit, which is, I think we're healthily skeptical of. And I think it's worth saying that we need all kinds of people at the table in smart cities. Right now, there are a lot of really fantastic computer programmers out there and hardware developers that they care a lot about cities and they're doing really, really good things. But there are many fewer designers and planners that are passionate about data and computers, and actually we're not equal. We don't do exactly the same thing, and we think maybe there should be some more planners and designers out there who do these things, and maybe we need to be a bit more proactive rather than reactive about the whole thing. So I really like this little story here. We got a call at one point from Y Combinator. I don't know if you all know who that is. It's an incubator. They do some really fantastic stuff out in Silicon Valley. They incubated Dropbox and a number of other really huge companies. And like, hey, we're thinking about starting a city project. We're going to make cities. What do you think? I was like, oh, yeah, that sounds great. I mean, we like cities too. They hired the CEO, and I don't know if you guys know I Can Has Cheeseburger, this website with cat memes and images. Well, the guy who used to be CEO of that is now CEO of the Cities Project at Y Combinator. And so we were chatting, and they were like, yeah, we think it's going to be great. We're going to make tabula rasa a city. They didn't say it that way, but they said, we're going to make a city we're going to do everything we can. It's going to be great. There are going to be no rules or constraints. We're like, oh, Well, I mean, as designers, all we have is rules and constraints, you know? And that's kind of what makes complicated, wonderful things, right? And that's what urbanism is. So it's, you know, it's two really different perspectives, and I think we need that conversation to be more full. And we have nothing against cats. We like them a lot. This is actually from My Can Has Cheeseburger. It's really fun. You should all go see it. But cat cuteness is, in fact, not indicative of our value system when it comes to designing urban space. And so this question of value systems and how we think about it is really important. And we like to look at this metaphor, well, I don't know, maybe analogy, I don't know what the proper thing is, but there's this really great machine learning project out there called Edges to Cats. And basically what they've done is taken a bajillion, quintillion, who knows, thousands of photographs, looked at the edges of cats, and now what happens is when you plug in an edge, a line, you draw a cat, right? It spits back out a cat. It's fantastic. So obviously, you know, I'm an architect. I'm going to design a building. It's amazing. It's got cat paws, and it has eyes, and it's furry, and it's super cute. But it's not relevant to designing cities. Software and the types of things that we do, the types of processes that we use matter, and we have to design those too. We have to design the processes in order to get meaningful output. So we try to do this at Supernormal. We try to build tools that accommodate our value system. We try to take responsibility for a relationship between technology and design. And we try to do these things so that our values are reflected, right? So we believe in things like flexibility and agility, change over time, replicability, that's a big thing for us in prototypes, sensitivity to local culture. So this is one thing we're doing right now, for example. It's a little tool called the American City Metrics, or it's a bad name. You guys can help me think of a better one. It's a sort of bottom-up automated atlas of place. We looked at places through the lens of the 5-minute walk shed, how far you can walk, right, in about 5 minutes, which we think pretty well approximates the scale of human experience. And we use these for planning and design applications, hopefully to have influence on future design outcomes and more broadly understand variables across location and across time. So we ask questions. Some of the things are like what designers think about. You know, does a place have good bones? You know, what really matters? What about value over time? That's more like real estate, maybe, right? Does it display longevity and value? And then how is it performing for people? Maybe that's a little bit more like what planners think about. So we kind of squish all that together a little bit and try to take all of those kind of qualitative things that are hard to measure and quantify them, and create a sort of index of sorts that comes out on the other side. So physical components like intersections, units per acre, job centers, so on and so forth, market indicators, you know, from even some casual sources like Zillow and other places that we can scrape information from, and social opportunity. So just FYI, the types of data sources that we use, there's more and open, but more and better open data all the time. This is GIS provided by municipalities and governments. Informal data, we call it, which is stuff we take from APIs or we scrape. Sensor network data is coming on board more and more. Mobile device data, again, this is a big deal. Real-time location constraint surveying, that helps us kind of really get people's feelings. And it's worth saying that we don't reinvent the wheel. We take things that have worked already for a long time and we try to reappropriate them into the language of today and for the needs of today. There's this guy, Giambattista Noli, he's awesome, and he's a cartographer from the 18th century. And this is all about the sort of social stuff that's essential to our lives. And so we take a page out of his book. We take many pages out of the book of the great Alan Jacobs. He basically looked at urban places. I'm sure many of you are aware of him. Broke them down. He mapped all these places at a mile by a mile and said, all right, I'm gonna count intersections. And I think this is a really great way to think about what a place is like and how walkable it is. And so here we have Copenhagen, great, 244. Venice, crazy. You can get lost here, but it's great. 1725. Irvine, California sucks, right? Apparently. I've never been there. And then we have Savannah, the site of CNU 2018. And the question is, how do we take Alan Jacobs and Giambattista Noli and update them for 2017 and the way that we live and make today? How do we allow that to adapt to new technological capacity? So we're not going to use an army of grad students to draw Alan Jacobs maps. We don't have the capacity for that. But what we can do is tap into the Google Maps API and start looking at it that way, and we can start automating these things. And again, we use the 5-minute walk shed. We think that's pretty good, and it allows us to measure consistently over many, many, many places, possibly infinite places. And so these are the kinds of things we get. I'm not going to go into it a huge amount of detail, but you can generally see that places like Provincetown are not doing so well. White is where humans can't go because it's private property or streets, and places like Queen Anne, which is largely dark, it's actually performing pretty well. And so then the question becomes, all right, we got to go and do this in practice, right? How do we translate these things, these meaningful inputs, into development, right, in the real world? How do we leverage all of our design and planning expertise, which is truly valuable? Technology doesn't matter without it. And how do we improve the translation into better development and design practices? So I'll give 3 examples here. I might have to speed through one of them. Practice, data systematization, and design in the real world. This is a great client that we have. It's a startup client, and the goal was for them, it's a company called Solby, and they wanted to create childcare catering to people like me, millennial parents with babies who have enough money to pay for childcare, I work, all these things. But they're also living in urban places. And so what we're doing for them is a couple of things. We're designing the first prototype in the Boston area, but we're also helping them to understand how to optimize their location and other markets so that they can seamlessly connect their concepts from Boston to Minneapolis to Austin, so on and so forth. And so the goal here is to increase sensitivity to place over many locations and not just take the same thing. We're not trying to take McDonald's and put it in 40 different places, right? We actually want to be sensitive to the local culture. So when we think about location optimization from a planning perspective, we look at brand values. What are the values of Solby? What do they want? And this is something like spatial, programmatic, and social criteria. And we use a bunch of different data sources for this. And hopefully on the other side of that, what spits out is some neighborhood recommendations per a given regional area or a metro region. And so in this case, we put in all these things, and what got spit out was garages, which actually, if you think about it, makes a whole lot of sense. This is a company that wants to be they want to be proximate, actually, they didn't know this, but this is true, to places where people both live and work. That suggests a very, very specific kind of fabric that has only 3 to 4 areas in Boston that are actually optimal for it. And they want activation over more hours of the day. And a garage, a sort of high bay space that allows us to go in flexibly, put things in there and reconfigure, actually makes a lot of sense, right? It's about 10,000 square feet. It kind of works. And these happen to be all over the place, right? I mean, they're being repurposed all the time. So this is what we've been focusing on. And as we, after we go through location optimization, we try to be smart about systematizing the design process as well. And I'm not going to talk about that a lot today, but we think a lot about what new modes of fabrication should be looking like and how you can start thinking about mass customization. This happens to be the classrooms that we designed for them. The goal here was to make a flexible design prototype that can accommodate a range of variables. So we make our designs, hopefully, very sensitive to local places by leveraging efficiencies of scale that also helps us to reduce the curb in the labor market and a variety of other things. So you can kind of see here, there's a plan. Right? This is for one given location. This doesn't show how they change across location, but it shows how they change across times of the day. And slightly off topic, but it's worth saying that this is a pretty nice and neat little solution to the issue of ground level retail activation, right? So during the day, these things are being classrooms, and in the evening time and on the weekends, they get pushed back in. There's an attached cafe, it's part of the program, and now they're activating the street over more hours of the day. So how do we take that now and allow it to customize to many more locations? Downtown Crossing in Boston, this is close to us. The Business Improvement District in downtown Boston is having a really hard time getting visitors to stick. There are a lot of people that come there. It's a nexus of transit, but trying to figure out how they can optimize the public space and their ground level tenancies for who's there, but they don't really understand what's going on, is something we're trying to help them with. This is a collection zone in downtown Crossing. The black line there shows the district, and these DRT2YY, these are our collection zone for mobile device data. So again, this comes back into the picture. And we worked with a mobile ad tech company. We can debate whether that's a good thing to do or not, but a lot of people are using this data, and it's not designers and planners right now. So we said, maybe we should. Let's just give it a shot and see what happens. So we did, and it turns out that you get an incredibly high resolution view of the city based upon mobile device data. We can see here that the early evening is underperforming. At the top there's a bar that shows what's happening over different times of the day, so more activity versus less activity, right? It's really crappy in the afternoon, in the evening commute, and that's too bad because that should be a time when people stick and have drinks and go get something to eat. So it helps us understand existing activity, but also, of course, to optimize for future activity. And, powerfully, this is something like taking the census of a street over 10 hours rather than the census of a neighborhood over 10 years. And that's not nothing. What you can see here is that millennials there in the red are kind of gathered around the university area and the park, whereas the little black dots, I think I have a laser pointer here. Yes, I definitely do. This is the financial district. That's not. That's the university area. This is our study zone right here, and it's right in the middle. So what comes out on the other side for us is really important observations about how we can start mixing those communities, how we can start thinking about them more critically, and for the underperforming times. This is also about convincing the bid that that's what's happening. Like, I could have probably walked down there and told you that that's what's happening, but this is also about convincing. We can now understand how a big development by Millennium Partners is actually changing the district already, so on and so forth. And so what comes out on the other side for us is a set of planning recommendations for street management, ground level use optimization, and design. Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. This is for the Heinz Foundation, Heinz Endowments, I should say, and we're working with them to make data work for community development in fringe neighborhoods. So this is actually about optimizing investment and social impact in an area that's experiencing both gentrification and rapid decline and blight. I'm from Pittsburgh, and so this was a very exciting process for me personally. This is using a programming language called D3. We effectively were looking here at parcel data, and in brief, we were trying to figure out what are the fault lines, where are the neighborhoods that are maybe most in need and most at risk. And this is a sliding scale, it's inflation adjusted to show us property values between sales, so we can understand how fast a neighborhood is changing. And so you can see here Homewood and Point Breeze are key. We found Airbnb actually is another really good way to understand rates of change and how a city is changing. And interestingly enough, the American Spirit Index, as we call it started off as a joke in our office, but it turns out to be useful. We said, where are the hipsters? They usually, like where they go, where the artists go, right? There's something there. And so we decided to measure through the American Spirit API and info group listings. And actually, it turns out that where there is greater market penetration of American Spirits in Boston, it's true. Those are the areas that are gentrifying. So if any of you are from the area, Somerville, Eastie, Alston, Dorchester, these are the places where there are American Spirits. Invest now. So the rental heat map, I'm actually going to skip this. This is basically if we start thinking about how are we going to develop, how do we get better comps. So this is another way from a real estate and development perspective that we've been thinking hopefully more intelligently about that. And the complementary side of that is not only where's the most need and how can we start thinking about development, but how can we measure community efficacy? So how can we match the areas with the most need to the areas where we think there'll be the most potential for success? And these things hopefully will drive infill development there, and the quality of it. All right, I've got one project left. I know I have 2 minutes, so I'm going to try to whiz through it. This is actually an incredibly important scope of work for us. This is when we've been able to, I think, bridge the gap between data and measurement, something called metrics, and prototyping, which is a little bit like reverse engineering development, in our opinion. It's creating a feedback loop between these things. And so we created this set of metrics for this company. They were quite progressive, and we're measuring the things we want to see more of. These factors here, environment, happiness, community, these are their value system according to their corporate mission. And so it's kind of like a fancy and automated version of like a post-occupancy user and building study at the scale of a walkshed. And so we measure things like social access based upon Allen Jacobs intersections, right? So we're taking all these things that we think are really good, measuring them, and I can tell you right now, I can't show you because it's confidential, but it's very clear what stacks up and what doesn't and what communities work. You might be surprised around the country. And the goal here was to be very considerate of, I think, and sensitive to the status quo. Many of the properties, particularly in the area where this company is developing, tend to be self-similar. So you have neighborhoods where all big products are in one area and they're tied to high prices. All little products are in one area and they tend to be tied to low prices. And so for us, the question of how longevity comes into that is a big question, right? So longevity was a metric. Started thinking about, all right, if longevity is an indicator, then how do we measure that? Well, one way is to talk about product diversity or unit type. And so right now it's a lot of single family and then a lot of other stuff, but how do we bridge that gap? And so I'm now officially over time, I think, but I'll breeze through. We did a crazy study that shows how we might be able to bridge that gap between the product types that they have right now and what will be happening in the future, so the large commercial mixed use and the single family. And we even said, listen, we think we can create a 21st century cul-de-sac here, and we think we can optimize that for you guys with non-residential uses at the corner, a lot of the things that June was talking about, actually. Very, maybe a little bit about the sharing economy in here too. You know, how can we think about co-housing more critically in shared landscapes? And how do we really increase the diversity here? So last two slides. We get something that looks a little bit like this. This is our family tree. Using one of my partners is, he comes out of the world of prefab with Blue Homes. And so we've been using a lot of smart prefab technology and trying to create the most amount of variation with the least amount of means. It's type heavy. And this is kind of what we get. You know, it's a little bit like, as I said, reverse engineering a place, breaking it apart into bits and bytes and then reconfiguring it to systematically, but maybe not neatly, align with our value systems and capacity in 2017. Thank you.